The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns, and that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control. Larry Pratt's latest book is now available. On the Firing Line, Essays in the Defense of Liberty can be purchased from Gun Owners of America for only $18 plus shipping and handling. On the Firing Line is a collection of essays that GOA's Executive Director Larry Pratt has written over the last few years. They were composed in the battle to defend the right to keep and bear arms, as well as the rest of our liberties protected in the Bill of Rights. Pratt has taken on the arguments used by the enemies of freedom who would disarm and subjugate Americans. Pratt shows that the debate transcends firearms because the debate is really about control. Who will control the lives of private citizens? Will it be each person individually, or will it be the government? You can order your copy of On the Firing Line by going to the GOA website at gunowners.org, or you can call GOA's toll-free number 1-888-886-GUNS. That's 888-886-GUNS.
This is the Gun Owners News Hour, with the latest news about threats to your liberty and your right to keep and bear arms. Our host is Larry Pratt, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. Our guests include elected and other public officials, journalists, citizen activists, and others who are fighting for the Bill of Rights, especially the Second Amendment. The Gun Owners News Hour covers a broad range of constitutional issues, particularly the debate over private ownership of firearms. Remember, the issue is not just about gun control, it's about control. Now, here's your host, Larry Pratt.
Greetings and welcome to this edition of the News Hour. I want to talk about a really useful book by my good friend Alan Korwin. It's entitled Your First Gun. I was doing C-SPAN, and the question to me at one point was, how many guns do you own? And I could easily say, I don't know, because I really don't. Not that it's really any of anybody's business.
Oh my God, he's got an arsenal.
Yep, probably so.
A compound?
And happy, only if you consider living in a cul-de-sac a compound.
When they start saying you live in a compound, Larry, you better watch out.
There you go. I probably don't have enough armament for those that would come looking for me in a compound. Anyway, Your First Gun is the kind of book that hopefully wouldn't immediately apply to many of the people listening to this interview with Alan Korwin, but it might, and then these points that we'll be going over might be extremely pertinent to something that you might be considering right now. More likely, it's going to be a subject that will facilitate your helping someone else come to the point where they kind of see the need, that they really should have one, as Alan puts it so nicely in his book. When seconds count, the police will be there in just a few minutes. And then he goes on to add to that old saw, which maybe many of you have already heard. When seconds count, the police will be there in a few minutes on a good day. Mm-hmm. So, yes, maybe that would help get somebody's wheels turning, and then they could benefit greatly by reading through Your First Gun. And, Alan, I think you've done us a great service as a Second Amendment community to, first of all, solidify the thinking of somebody who might have a gun somewhere locked up where it's inaccessible, and maybe it'll get him to rethink about, well, if I really needed that gun, could I get it fast enough? And some points that he might go over with his wife. You cover a lot of very practical things that people are very likely either going to face or have already faced. Maybe they didn't do the kind of job they would like to have done. You've done it for them, and so when we get back, we're going to go through some of the things that you will encounter, folks, in Your First Gun by Alan Korwin. Such a long time ago, it seems, when, in fact, having a firearm was considered such a commonplace. One of our members some time ago told me that when he grew up in New York City, he took his rifle on the subway to school because there was a junior ROTC program there. Nobody went screaming out of the subway car in which he was sitting. They
that
just
was me. I was on the bus with a rifle in the front.
And so you were on a bus. So now I know two guys that actually had that same sort of experience.
I went down to the Armory on 167th Street and University Avenue in the Bronx with my rifle every week to practice. Nobody got shot. Nobody ran around. It was perfectly normal.
Yeah. Oh, gee, there's a kid on his way to target practice. Next subject. We've kind of come a long way, and it's not a good way, and it's time that we have books like Alan Korwin's Your First Gun, because it not only gets into some of the mildly technical considerations of the size and the caliber of the ammunition that you might want to be using, but it also addresses some of these very issues that we're alluding to. And Alan, I think you've done the Second Amendment community quite a service. And folks, I can't tell you strongly enough, this is a book that you need to buy in quantity. I know that it is available for quantity purchase. You can get a hold of Alan Korwin at Bloomfield Press. It's probably, what is it, bloomfieldpress.com?
Or gunlaws.com is the easier way. Larry,
okay.
You've given me so much material in your short intro, we wouldn't have to go any further. I mean, first of all, your opening segment, this is not a debate about private gun ownership. This is a debate about freedom and the government's role in your life. If they're debating private gun ownership, they're violating their oath of office. There is no debate about private gun ownership. That's a given that predates the Constitution. The fact that they've opened a debate on this shows that they're way out of line, and it's a darn good thing you have guns.
Which is exactly why we do have guns, which is why we do have a Second Amendment. It's all about, and really nothing more than, keeping the government under control.
That's right.
Alan, I don't know whether you would agree, but I think hunting and self-defense are among the unenumerated rights protected by the Ninth Amendment.
That's right. And the government wants, and the left, the radical left who want to destroy America, are injecting hunting and target practice and even self-defense into this debate. It's about balance of power. You think America's free by luck? By the grace of God? This is balance of power and real politics. The government has never turned on the people in this country, as they have in every nation on earth throughout history, because they cannot, because we are armed. In England, in France, the emperors in Japan, they take and slaughter their people. They can't do that here because we're armed. And that's what Your First Gun is about. You said that gun owners maybe aren't the market for this. Gun owners are precisely the market for this because they fight with their gunless friends and their gunless neighbors and their gunless relatives, and maybe they don't have the best arguments and just end up in a battle. When somebody reads this book, Your First Gun, should you buy one and join 60 million safely armed American homes? It makes their brains boil. They have no idea that there are 60 million safely armed American homes.
Right.
This book deals with the social issues and the cultural issues and the things these people never ask themselves. You were talking about keeping your guns locked up to be safe. Jeff Cooper said it. A gun that's safe isn't worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
These are points that gun owners need to refresh themselves on. There is so much in here for gun-owning public and for the gunless. If you're gunless, folks, that's not safe. And that's why this is Your First Gun as a title. But this is my 14th book. I've written 10 books on gun laws. and how to protect yourself and what to do after a shooting and all that stuff I have up at gunlaws.com. This book is a departure for me, but this is for the Piers Morgans of the world who want to know, why do you need a gun? Well, I'll tell you why you need a gun. And first of all, ownership of property in America isn't based on need, you commie, pinko, low-life, bottom-feeding maggot.
Well, we're talking about the book Your First Gun. It's Alan Korwin's 14th book, but it certainly would be a great idea for that person who is perhaps in need of thinking about his first gun. By the way, I had promised before the break that we would take a look at the wisdom, the large, impressively massive knowledge base of our vice president, who knows that a shotgun would be so much better and easier for a wee little woman to handle than one of those really cannon-like AR-15s. Alan, why don't we start right there and see how much wisdom we can unpack from what the vice president is advising.
The vice president doesn't have a clue, and if you want to look at guns in general, the idea of telling a person what kind of gun they should get for a first gun, and people ask me this all the time, what kind of gun should I get? My answer is take a class. If you go to a class, you'll be exposed to a variety of firearms, and my personal choice, first time you ever set off a round, that extra virgin experience should be with a .22, so you don't have the shock and awe of a cannon.
Right.
Most people pick up their first gun, first time they pick up a real gun, they're surprised at how heavy it is. They don't realize. When a nut on TV says a gun that fires 600 rounds a minute, the first time you pick up 600 rounds of ammo, you pull your arm out of its socket.
Mm-hmm.
Ammunition's heavy. Your first gun is like your first pair of shoes. You got to try them on. And when you pick up your first firearm, you find out it's heavy. A small-framed individual, old person, young person, male, female, I don't think a long gun is where to start unless you're a kid with a small bolt-action .22 or a small-gauge shotgun. But this is something you find out in a class with an instructor, with other people who are having that extra virgin experience of a first exposure to firearms.
I mentioned my appearance at C-SPAN. The next person up, well, we were at a gun store, the Blue Ridge Arsenal in Chantilly, Virginia, which was nice enough to...
They carry my Virginia Gun Owners Guide.
Yes, they do, which I think is very much to their credit. It's one of the several pluses about that store. The first owner, it may still be the current owner, a former police officer, and so he knows something about self-defense and guns. But Emily Miller came in, Emily Miller of
yes, of course.
Washington Times, who had an extraordinarily useful series, Emily Gets Her Gun, and it was a chronicle over several weeks of all that she had to do to get one poor little gun in the District of Columbia, now that it's more or less legal, all of the obstacles that were set up. And so she was an excellent person for C-SPAN to have, and I'm delighted that they did. Anyway, when I saw her in person, I was struck that she's really kind of a tiny person.
She is.
And if she were to, of course, she knows so much more than the vice president, she's not going to be confused by him. But if somebody her size were to go and listen to the vice president and get that, well, let's see, let's try a 12-gauge shotgun here, she'd be sitting or laying on the ground after that first shot. And the vice president would probably lead to, following his advice, would probably lead to broken collarbones for people her size. It's just so amazing. And, of course, the media knows so little that nobody laughs in his face when he talks about how it's so much easier to handle a shotgun than an AR-15.
and these are not the people who should be setting gun policy. You want people who understand firearms to do this. The media, their understanding of guns is so low, they need counseling.
I think it comes from the Westerns. That's what they know.
Oh, where they throw bullets as they shoot. They kind of throw them. They look you in the eye and they shoot from the hip. You try that at the range, you don't even hit the target.
And, of course, it's even more effective when you hold the gun sideways, right?
That's actually a safety technique. They teach black people on TV to hold your gun sideways, and that's a way to miss. So that saves lives. If you're at the range, I know it's funny, but if you're at the range, next time you're at the range, try holding your gun sideways, and you have a very hard time getting the front blade sight in between the rear double dot sight. Your muscles don't work well, and it's very hard to aim that way. So this is a life-saving technique that they use on TV.
It is kind of awkward to hold that gun sideways and then to lean yourself over 45 degrees so you can try to line up the sight.
And then the gun has a greater tendency to jam. So that's also a life-saving technique, and we have to acknowledge that. The shells don't eject properly, so it looks kind of stupid except to the people who are stupid, and then stupid plus stupid equals not so stupid, and that's the way they do it. Everything you see about guns on TV is wrong, and that's a point I make in Your First Gun. Now, Gun Owners of America is making this book available, so if people want to get a copy of Your First Gun, which no matter how much you know about guns, you will learn things in here, including there's a whole bunch of anecdotes about people's first guns. And Larry, I haven't told anybody about this yet, so this is a very first on your show. You're in it. I got anecdotes from a lot of folks, and your story about your first gun is dramatic and remarkable, and it's in there. And we have stories from first gun under the Christmas tree to riots going on in town and people rushing out to get their first gun. And these stories are revealing, heartwarming, charming, and you will recognize it. And everybody who listens to your show remembers in vivid color their first gun. This was a wonderful experience. It's a piece of Americana. And while the left is screaming about banning guns...
Well, I could just tell you, Alan, I wish there'd been an AR-15 at the sporting goods store when I went to get it, because it would sure have hurt my shoulder a whole lot less than that shotgun I bought as my first gun. We're talking about Your First Gun, which is book number 14 by Alan Korwin, definitely one of our country's leading experts on firearms law. He's written a lot of books on laws of the various states, Supreme Court cases. All of this you can get if you go to gunlaws.com, and there's quite a library there just from one guy's pen. So, Alan, we did get as far as the first shot that somebody fires probably ought to be from a .22, so they don't have to pick themselves up or worry about that bruise that they just put on their forehead when the .357 comes whamming back and pops them right in the middle of the forehead.
I've heard those stories.
Those are discouraging moments, and the idea is to recruit people, not to convince them that it's the worst idea anybody ever had.
There are people. There's a lawyer here in town who gave his wife, "Here, honey, you got to try this cannon." And he thought he was being cool. And I understand the sort of macho psychology, but the worst thing you can do is give a newcomer a cannon, a .44, a .357, a .45. You want to start a newcomer out with a .22. That's my opinion. Something light, easy, low blast, low shock, not a lot of debris, and let him hit the target, put the target up close. I mean, start them out easy and get somebody to enjoy it.
And it's not that unrealistic to put a target close, because I believe it's still correct that the average distance of a self-defense shooting, where a shooting actually occurs and a bad guy is hit, is around 10 feet.
Yeah, it's face-to-face.
It's not Annie Oakley stuff.
Where are you sitting right now listening to this show? The adversary is going to be that close. But almost nobody ever shoots at anybody. When they say the only purpose of a gun is to kill somebody, then all our guns are defective because nobody's ever been killed with them. Guns are used defensively without firing most of the time. And the whole purpose of Your First Gun is to bring back your memories of what it was like and to help you encourage other people to do it. This book, Your First Gun, will increase our numbers, and with greater numbers we have more political clout. And it deals with these social issues. You've heard these questions, and they're framed in sort of ignorant terms, this takes the sting out of it. Where would I even put the thing? What good is a gun if a criminal has it pointed at me already? Can't the crook just take my gun away and use it against me? That question drives me nuts, because if that was true, then you could take the crook's gun away and use it against him. It doesn't work that way. And the people without guns need to hear these answers and need their idiot questions. I say that to you, not to them, but need their ignorant questions answered in a calm, reasonable way, so they go, oh, I never thought about that. Well, I have kids in the house. Isn't having a gun in the house dangerous? Of course it's dangerous. It's supposed to be dangerous. It wouldn't be any good if it wasn't dangerous. But you're a mature adult. You can handle dangerous things like the 60 million other households. And are you ready to step up to the plate and be a mature adult and do what your neighbors do, and all of a sudden find out that most of your neighbors actually have guns, and they never discussed it with you because they could see you weren't ready, you wouldn't discuss it, you'd fly into a rage, you've been propagandized so heavily that they don't talk to you about the fact that they keep a gun, because not having a gun is so dangerous. And little by little you come up to speed, and that's why I wrote Your First Gun. Mm-hmm. So you have a gun, you understand it, you need to get your first gun so you can read it and give it to somebody who needs it and needs to understand these things. It will help improve your ability to describe these things to people you meet.
Yeah, that's important. The discussion of the danger of a gun in the house, I thought was excellent. Is a gun in the house dangerous? Well, of course it is. And of course, my somewhat snide way of thinking says, yeah, well, it better be. Otherwise, why was I buying it?
You know, I added that. There's the rules for gun safety, we all know. The NRA rules, there's some things in here. Why is the NRA so political? And they've never heard that the NRA, number one, is a civil rights organization, and the NRA designs all the safety rules, and all the instructors are all NRA certified. But there's a set of gun safety rules for using a gun. Your listeners and most of us are familiar with the rules for keeping a gun from going off when you don't want it to go off. Unload a gun, store it in a safe manner, finger off the trigger, muzzle down range. Those are the rules for not firing a gun. There are what they call the Lovejoy's rules for using a gun. Rule number one, you must have a gun. Rule number two, your gun should always be loaded and ready to fire. And rule number three, the first hit counts more than the first shot. Now, these are rules for using a gun for its intended purpose, and that is to protect people. The antis and the media are constantly yelling that the only purpose of a gun is to kill people. Well, that's not why we give them to the police. So the propaganda and the Kool-Aid deflects the logic of your own eyes. We give the police guns to protect people, not to kill people. And you buy a gun for protection and for safety and to stop crime. That's why you get a gun. And that's why there are the Lovejoy rules.
If guns only were doing their job by killing people, then the Clinton Justice Department estimate of 4,000 plus defensive gun uses a day in the United States would mean we're looking at over 1.5 million dead people from guns every year. And no, most criminals are evil, but they're generally kind of rational given their evil impulses, and they're normally not suicidal. That happens, right, of course. And when they see a gun in the hands of a victim, that's a game changer. Very few of them had a plan B, and plan B becomes, I got to get out of here fast.
That's right. 98 to 98% of all DGUs, defensive gun uses, involve not firing the gun. Now, I've seen you use those numbers, Larry, and I don't like using the numerical arguments because both sides have numbers and they don't match. The Clinton Justice Department study came up with the highest number of DGUs, and it was so bad that Clinton had that study suppressed. But you can get the book Armed by Kleck and Cates that has the 13 scholarly studies that were done before the Clinton DOJ study, and they show between 700,000 and 2.5 million DGUs, defensive gun uses, a year, depending on study size, set of respondents, time frames. 700,000 to 2.5 million a year. 13 studies. They're all in that one book, Armed. That book is available at gunlaws.com. If you remind me after the show, I'll send you a copy, or just go to my website and get one. So
and
we have.
Interestingly, Gary Kleck is not the stereotypical Second Amendment sort of guy.
He's a left-wing scholar.
He's a left-wing scholar, but he'll tell you right straight up, I belong to the NAACP,
Right.
the ACLU, and he started out probably suspecting that he was going to find that guns are big bad because that's what everybody around him keeps talking about.
The research didn't show that.
And frankly, you got to admire somebody who's willing to not only publish conclusions that were contrary to his initial biases, but to make his data available as a good scientist, which is rather unusual among the anti-gun studies. It's like prying something from cold, dead fingers to get their data.
That's right. So he published the results. We have far more defensive gun uses than criminal misuse. And the media, even the fair and balanced side, every time they show a shooting, they should show 5 or 10 people alive today and crime stopped because of the presence of a gun. And this belies the point that the Second Amendment is there to keep the government under control and to preserve peace and freedom. Guns are why America is still free. We actually sell a button that says that. And we've had people testify in their state legislatures wearing the button that says guns are why America is still free. We're not free by luck, like I said earlier. This is because we have a balance of power, and the Second Amendment preserves that. And the more people who own guns either take them to the range.
Let me just give you a couple of the statements that you'll find in your first gun, which I thought were great examples of what the felicitous piece of writing Alan Korwin has given us. Of course, he is a professional writer, so that is evidenced by some of these statements. For example, this is an approximate quote, gun ownership is a guaranteed option, not a requirement. We have the right to be gunless, but not to impose that on others. I thought, now that really hopefully might quiet the anti-Second Amendment guy long enough to give us a chance to give him some of the arguments that you've got in your book. Another thought that you had, which I thought was right up there towards the top, disarming an innocent person, think the District of Columbia, Chicago, disarming an innocent person is an act of violence. And isn't it true that their violent crime rate reflects the act of violence committed against people in those jurisdictions?
They're related, but I don't think they're directly connected. I got that from my friend Craig Lindsay, who's no longer of this earth. When you disarm an innocent person, that's not done like you sell a cupcake. That's done by force. You have people with guns take the gun or threaten the force in order to disarm an innocent person. So when they, like in Michigan, they're threatening, if you own this gun, we're going to ban it and you have to turn it in, that's not optional, that's not arbitrary, that's not voluntary. That's an act of violence on behalf of the people who are taking the guns away. So they're using violence to disarm the public, and that is a precursor to genocide, global disarmament, and absolute out-and-out tyranny.
And before you get to that horrible end, which has all too often happened, just look at the 20th century.
That's right.
There will be a more violent society as a result. England, oh, happy United Kingdom with their virtually total gun ban, is the 4th most violent country on earth.
Well, don't
How's
tell that
that working out for you, Brits?
I know it. And look, they tried to disarm us way back when, and now we have an unlicensed broadcaster using our free speech trying to disarm us again. I wonder if he would support the idea of a license to broadcast. Do you think Piers Morgan should be licensed and be able to prove his competence in order to broadcast. Why would an honest broadcaster be against something like that?
And do I get to sit on the licensing board, or does one of his buddies?
See, they don't realize this. They think it would be okay to license gun owners, and this is an argument I make in Your First Gun, to show this. So I have some leftist friends, and we're close on non-political issues because we're human beings. We have families. We have homes. We feed ourselves. They think it would be okay to license gun owners because we license drivers. It's an error in logic. It's seductive, but it's subtle error of logic. If we license drivers, we should license pilots, and we do, and that makes sense. But if we license gun owners, we should license broadcasters and writers. But broadcasters and writers don't think they should be licensed because that's a freedom. That's a liberty. The government has no business licensing them. Well, why not? Why would an honest broadcaster like Piers Morgan be against the license? And
what has he got to hide?
They can't even answer that, but there is an answer. And the answer is this. If he were to get on the air and speak his mind without the piece of paper in his wallet and without having passed the test and without giving up his fingerprints and without having paid the tax and getting an expiration date, he'd go to prison. And that's
right.
Not right. Because
that's
he'd
right.
be able to exercise that right without having to bow and scrape before the government, before his master, before the king who he's a subject to. And he doesn't have that license, and he doesn't prove his competence. And, in fact, he proves his incompetence every single day he's on the air. And I support his right to be incompetent on the air. But he's attacking my rights, so maybe I should attack his. And I'm armed.
Actually,
and to the extent he wants to disarm me, that's what the guns are for. That's ugly. I don't think he should go there.
No. Well, I've come to a point where I think I have grown in my view towards Piers Morgan.
Groan?
No, the alternate spelling.
Okay.
The idea being that as I reflected on my jousting with him, I thought, you know what? This was a good thing that this happened because right down to the accent of the guy, he reminds us why we're no longer British and don't want to be.
That's right. And he lost 230 years ago, and he should get over it. But he's still trying to win. You know, CNN chose a British subject and an ex-communist removed from the present administration under very controversial circumstances to anchor the presidential inauguration. That says something. They got a commie and a British subject anchoring the inauguration. We're going downhill fast, and CNN is no longer a news organization. They don't cover any self-defense, righteous use of guns, but they constantly hammer us on a drug-induced, psychotropically infused left-wing maniac who commits murder and try and conflate that with the righteous, decent ownership of firearms.
And by the way,
tool.
I barely was able to discover that I don't want to use the guy's name, the Newtown shooter in Connecticut, had a Facebook page for Satan. The guy that shot a bunch of people around Congresswoman Gifford had a little satanic occult altar in his backyard. That's another common thread. You think that maybe the fascination with evil blurs their understanding of thou shalt not kill?
You know, they had come out once or twice going, I think he has a connection to the Tea Party. And
you're right.
Quickly, when it wasn't so, this guy Dorner was an Obama lover. You read his manuscript, which they're now calling a manifesto. I don't know how they got that link, but I read his manuscript. He was pretty bright, but he's a Hollywood idolater. He's an Obama lover. He's way, way, way left-wing radical. Most of these guys who've committed these atrocities are left-wingers. They're certainly not NRA members or anything remotely close. They're on these psychotropic drugs. They're victims of big pharma, and the media is keeping this quiet. Even the Fair and Balanced stations are not bringing up with great spotlight how left-wing, drugged-out, evil-oriented, anti-religion these people are. there's a common thread. And on TV this morning, I was asked, do you think there's anything to it? Well, why even ask, do I think there's anything to it? The evidence is before our very eyes, and the guns have been present the whole time. When I was a kid, I carried a rifle on the bus. There was a rifle team. They're in my yearbook. They won awards. They're pictured with rifles.
And you probably practiced in the basement of the school. There are buildings in Fairfax County where our Gun Owners of America is located that may or may not still be used as schools, but if you go down into the basement, you can see where they had the rifle range.
They had ranges. We have stories of that. I have stories of that in this book, Your First Gun, which, by the way, is available through Gun Owners of America, right?
It is, and folks, you can see all of the rest of Alan Korwin's writings at gunlaws.com. So that's kind of going to be it for today. Alan Korwin, Your First Gun. I hope it's maybe your first million seller. I know you've sold a lot of books, but let's hope this one really makes it big. Thanks so much, pal.
Our rights to keep and bear arms has never been under as much attack. And Gun Owners of America are fighting daily in Washington to protect that right. This program, the Gun Owners News Hour, keeps you up to date on that fight. GOA is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. The Gun Owners News Hour is hosted by GOA's Executive Director, Larry Pratt. Be sure to join us next week. And remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.
Adam Lanza compiled extensive research on other mass shootings, graphic details about the killers, their weapons, and victims. Sources say Lanza tracked the death tolls of other attacks and viewed them in terms of scores. Investigators believe Lanza was trying to achieve a higher score than other mass killers when he attacked the nearby school. Investigators suspect Lanza viewed the school as an easy target filled with people. As we first reported last month, Lanza was particularly obsessed with Anders Breivik, a Norwegian man who killed 77 people in July 2011. But Lanza's research went beyond Breivik. Inside the home Lanza shared with his mother, investigators found information about numerous high-profile crimes. One law enforcement official who was briefed on the case said he's never heard of another killer who did more planning and organizing. Lanza also spent countless hours inside his house in a basement gaming room with the windows blacked out. There, investigators found a large collection of violent shooting games. Now, investigators believe Lanza's fascination with those video games and other notorious killers led him to act out his deadly fantasy. The extensive research makes it clear, Bob, this was not an act of sudden rage, but rather a premeditated massacre.